start in a second. You guys ready? You're good? Awesome. Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Trevisano. I am the senior strategist focused on West Side Market, working for Mayor Bibb, and this is In the Market for Progress. So this is a series that has been sponsored really generously by PNC Foundation. This is one of a 7-part series where we're focusing on all the different ways that West Side Market impacts, not just its neighborhood or the vendors inside the market, but really our whole region. So we've done some talks about minority entrepreneurship, women's entrepreneurship, food access. We've talked about the history of the market. All of those talks are recorded and available on TV20's website, or if you go to westsidemarket.org and you go to the In the Market tab, you can go through and watch all of those previous talks that we've had. So if you love what you heard today and you want to see more in your free time, that's where you can go to do that. And then we have one more after this, focusing on minority entrepreneurship on September 14th. So if you're here and you registered, you'll get a little email update letting you know that you should go to that one as well. Before I kick it over to our moderator, who will introduce our speakers, if you registered and attended, you are entered into a raffle for $50 worth of market cash. And our raffle winner is Yoshi. If you don't know, you can get market cash at Irene Deaver Dairy in the market. You can use it just like cash, and it goes to support our merchants and goes towards our merchant association. So it's really nice for the holidays. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Libby. We're going to do a moderated talk for about 40-ish minutes, and then after that, you'll have an opportunity to ask these wonderful panelists questions. So if you have questions, save them for the end, and you'll be able to be part of the conversation. So with that, thank you all for being here.
Hi everyone, my name is Libby Lehman. I work for the City of Cleveland in the Office of Sustainability. I'm the project manager for Built Environment, so my role, we really look at what kind of sustainability work we're doing in our transportation systems as well as in our buildings. So I'm going to first, pass it down the line for the panelists to introduce themselves. And then I'll talk a little bit and sort of introduce our topic and define climate resiliency a little bit. And then we'll kind of get into some of the questions.
Cool, I'll start. My name's Dan Brown. I'm one of the founders of Rust Belt Riders. We're a company that's been around since about 2014. We work with businesses, organizations, and individuals all over Northeast Ohio to help divert food from going to landfills. Our mission is to feed people and not landfills. About 2 years ago, we became a worker-owned social enterprise, and so we're a team of about 30 right now, and of those 30 people on our team, 12 of them are worker owners. So we believe deeply that how we do our work is just as important as the work that it is we're doing. And we're really deeply committed to helping to combat the climate crisis. We'll talk more about the work that we're doing at the West Side Market and the city and with Riddall and with others. But yeah, looking forward to chatting with y'all.
All right. Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Keemon Durden. I am one of the co-founders of the Riddall Green Partnership, located on the east side of Cleveland. We operate an urban farm, training facility, compost facility, full-scale aquaculture facility where we raise over 8,000 tilapia fish. We just started a tree nursery that will be providing trees to the city of Cleveland. Again, our work goes on and on. We just introduced a community kitchen where we serve food twice a week to our community residents. We do Taco Tuesday and Fish Fry Friday. So it's the freshest fish you could ever get, straight from the pond, right to the plate. So if you guys are ever in the neighborhood, stop by and see us. We've been in operation for the last 13 years. Done a lot of great work in that community, very distressed community. But now we've watched the transformation of it since having us on site there off of 82nd and Kinsman. So again, to Dan's point, we'll talk more about what we do and how we do it as the meeting progresses. Thank you.
Oh, there it goes. Okay. I'm Laura Steinbrink with Emerald Built Environments. We are a sustainability consulting firm based here in Northeast Ohio, although we work internationally and across the United States. We focus on major renovation and new construction projects and help the owners, architects, construction team, and operators set and achieve their sustainability goals. We're best known for helping buildings achieve building certifications such as LEED. And one of the most recent sort of favorite projects would be right across the street there with Intro, the United States' largest mass timber building, LEED Gold certified.
Thank you. So before we get started in questions, I wanted to start and really define climate resiliency. When we think about climate change and climate change action, a lot of times that kind of falls in two different buckets of actions. The first is mitigation, and looking at how are we reducing our carbon emissions, really switching our fuel use so we're not burning fossil fuels, switching over to EVs, things like that, and reducing the emissions that root cause of climate change. But the other piece of that is climate adaptation. So kind of knowing where we are and facing the reality of, we are living in a world where the climate is different, and it's hotter and it's wetter and there's more extreme weather events. How do we ensure that our infrastructure and most importantly our communities are prepared and able to kind of cope and survive and thrive in sort of a world that looks a little bit different than what we're used to? And so when we talk about climate resiliency, it's really both of those pieces. So how are we mitigating the carbon emissions, but also how are we functioning in this world that looks different and responding to climate crises. And so in Cleveland, we have our climate action plan, and this really looks into actions in both of those areas, both mitigation and adaptation. And you said again, how are we preparing our communities for climate change? So today, we're really thinking about the West Side Market and this public space, and how can these public spaces serve to help again, not only mitigate climate change, but also be a resource for our communities. And so when we think about the West Side Market, one piece of this is the food access and local food, and how do we strengthen our local food systems so that we're not as reliant on food coming from other places, more vulnerable places, and we're not reliant on that transportation and the emissions that come from that. How are we ensuring that our communities are healthier with that better access to food, so that as the weather gets hotter and wetter, that we're more equipped to function in a world that looks like that. And also think about it in terms of a circular economy, and how are we, and when we say circular economy, it's how do we kind of redefine the resources that we're using so that we're not starting from scratch time and time again, and using resources and pulling resources out of our natural environment, but kind of reusing what we already have and making the most out of that. And then the last area that we want to focus on is the space itself, and how do we, as a city and as a community, utilize these spaces that are, these public spaces, so that they're a resource. And does that mean they're heating centers or cooling centers, resource distribution, and how do we equip those spaces so that they are going to be reliant sort of regardless if we're seeing more brownouts and a less resilient grid? How do we make them power independent? And how do we make sure that the emissions and the energy that those buildings and those spaces are using are as minimal as possible? So the three of these folks up here are kind of experts in each of those categories. And so I have some questions that I'm going to pose to everyone, and some that I'll direct at individuals. But I want to start off and ask, and this is going to be kind of posed to each one of you, kind of thinking about your world and where your work exists. But what does a climate resilient Cleveland look like? All this work that we're doing. What is kind of that end goal, or how do we know we're doing the right thing? You want to start?
Fun. Yeah, so climate resiliency, I think, is actually I think the right way about approaching it. I think that often people talk about climate change as though it's an open-ended question, as though should we do something about climate change? And I think that climate resiliency is the invitation to do big, brave, bold stuff, rather than quibbling about whether we should do anything. And so climate resilience to me, I think really hinges on the health of natural systems. I think that we think a lot about the work that we do through how nature-based climate solutions can actually emerge to help people and other species and our connection to land. And so just to sit with nature-based solutions for a little bit, I think that nature-based solutions are a way of sort of contrasting those from technocratic solutions, right? Which we also need, by the way. And so technocratic solutions would be solar panels and EV chargers, and absolutely we need those to totally decarbonize our grid. But I think that often missing in a lot of the conversations around where we're getting our power from and how we're getting around our cities is the importance of the built environment that we're interacting with, right? Trees do a great deal of cooling for urban heat island effect. Where we get our food from matters a great deal in terms of transportation costs and input and output of nitrogen and carbon. And so for me, I think that I'd love to see our region, and I think that climate resiliency can't be limited to any one city, but it really needs to be thought of as a watershed or a food shed or a really regional approach. So for me, it looks like we're a lot more connected to land, a lot more connected to seasonality. We're really invested in the health of our air, our water, and our soil, and understand the value that each of those ecosystems can drive. And if we can do that, I think that we'll treat them better. I think that we'll treat one another better. I think that we'll have a greater connection to this place that we call home and the neighbors that we have, both human and non-human. And so, yeah, I think that climate resilience is a big, bold invitation to do cool things that I think often aren't centered in a lot of the conversations around the climate crisis.
Thanks, and I do want to talk a little bit about I guess use this platform a little bit to talk about the City of Cleveland and our Office of Sustainability. And in our office, our work is sort of divided into subject areas, and so we have I kind of oversee the built environment projects, and Kathy Lynn, who's here today, is our circular economy manager, and we also have a nature built solutions, and I think since we've sort of reorganize our office in that way, the thing that has become really apparent to me is how many projects are the overlap of those. And I think, like Dan mentioned, it's this technocratic, there's the EV chargers, but it's also okay, well, where are we getting that power from? And I think the West Side Market is kind of this cool harmony of a lot of those solutions, whether it's the building itself or the food that is being distributed, where all those solutions are kind of coming together as this resource for our community. All right, do you need me to repeat the question or anything?
No,
Okay.
I can jump in. One benefit that Riddle has is we operate not just in Cleveland, but we have an international footprint. We have a farm project in Belize, Central America. We have a project in Ghana, West Africa, Kenya, East Africa, and also in Israel. And one of the things that's apparently clear is that each one of those areas are experiencing some of the same types of things in terms of environmental effects. And I think if we took a serious look at the environment, it's not that will it change, it has changed, right? This is the hottest summer probably on record. Water temperatures are higher than they've ever been. We're on a very, very slippery slope right now. And there's a term that floats around some of these international circles called climate smart agriculture. And what it says is that we can no longer farm the traditional ways that we used to, that we have to find innovative ways to adapt to a changing environment. And that's so important to the work that we do, because I love what Dan said about natural solutions, because I won't say all of the experts, but many of the experts have said that the only way to deal with global warming and those type of things is through natural solutions. And that means bringing carbon down out of the atmosphere and bringing it back down to Earth. So if all of the carbon that's in the atmosphere right now, if we stop doing everything, we stop driving cars, stop flying airplanes, it would still not bring that carbon down. You know, we have to think of natural solutions that bring that carbon down. It may not increase it, but it won't just dissipate and it won't bring it down. So what we've done at Ridall is to adapt use of products like biochar, carbon drawdown techniques to be able to bring this carbon back down to earth, because using this product called biochar is where you burn wood products in a high oxygen environment or low oxygen environment, and it turns into a sponge. So if you imagine, you all burned a fire log before, right? You burn a fire log, it turns into ash when it's done. But if you use the biochar burning technique, well, I shouldn't say burning, it's pyrolyzing is what I've been told. It stays the form of a log even after it burns. So it just burns the carbon out, but the log is still intact. So you still have a full log the way you put it in the fire, but the carbon is out of it. So now it becomes a carbon sponge. So when you grind it or mix it in with compost or soil, it will help bring down that carbon out of the atmosphere. So I'm saying all that to say that natural solutions are going to be the best way, through composting, through planting trees is the most effective way, because I think you talked about the circular economy. So when you have a system where you're bringing in food waste, turning it into compost, inoculating it with biochar, that you can feed your plants and plant trees in, and then take that food to market that has a higher nutritional value, you can begin to see how this is a closed loop system. That each system affects the other system and builds upon it in a way that helps the environment. So I agree 100% with what Dan said. Natural solutions are the way to go. I think that what we believe at Ridall is that the local food economy is going to be the best solution. If you look at the European model of a food system, in Europe, folks don't go and buy food for the whole week to fill their refrigerator and freezers. In Europe, they buy food for a couple days because they can walk to the market, the local, market every day, and buy fresh food, fresh produce, and they're not necessarily jamming a refrigerator or freezer. I mean, my grandmother, God bless her soul, she has a refrigerator full of frozen meat and everything in her freezer that's been there for years. And how sustainable was that, I can't say, but I know that fresh food, fresh vegetables is going to do the body much better than frozen or processed foods. And then the last thing I would add is that the value of compost, and I'm sure my panelists can confirm with this, if there's no nutrition in the soil, there's no nutrition in the plant. There's no way around it. It could look like an apple, it could look like an orange, it could look like a strawberry, but it just looks like that. When you go to eat it, when you go to bite it, there's no taste. Now, I tell people when we do farm tours, I tell people, like in the movie The Matrix, I say, you've never eaten food before in your entire life. You've been eating depleted food with no vegetables, with no nutrients, so it's not giving the body anything. So one of the telltale signs of malnutrition has always been typically the swollen belly. And that's what you see mostly in our society, a lot now, is swollen bellies, but it's not from overeating. It's from being malnutritioned. That folks are eating, but they're not being nourished from the food that they're eating. So it's a bigger situation, but natural solutions, I think, are the best way to go. Thank you.
And I think, thinking about that proximity to those natural solutions and to that food, and you mentioned, the walkability to fresh produce that's healthy and getting that as you need it. I think that's, again, kind of going back to the connectivity of all of these climate solutions and how are we developing our cities. And I know, the city is working on sort of a new model for how neighborhoods are zoned, so that it's really looking at, okay, what are individuals' proximity to the resources they need like a grocery store that has, fresh and healthy and, local food. And again, I think when we're thinking about the West Side Market, that's what it is. It is a market that people can walk to and they can get the food they need that day. And so now we're going to switch a little bit because Laura's a little more on the built environment, but that's another really key piece to this.
Right. So when Dan was talking and he was saying that the technology part is great, but we need the natural systems, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. However, shelter is also really important for our home, work, and play. And if I look just at that piece, to me, what climate resiliency for our community looks like is very visible aspects of all neighborhoods generating their own electricity. I don't care how it is, generating and storing it so that it's there when they need it. But I think sort of in reflection of everything that my colleagues have said so far on this one particular question, we won't get there unless everybody sees their role. Everybody. So whether it's at work, at home, we all have to be part of the solution, and it's not okay for some parts not to be there.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the next question is, again, thinking about here in Cleveland, where have you seen the most success in progress towards climate resiliency, and where do you think the biggest deficits are?
Yeah, so I'm gonna date myself, but I was in college when I learned about these group of 3 friends that were getting together to start a farm in Kinsman, and that was this really, really cool aha moment that I had. That I was in school in Chicago, and the narrative at the time was get out of Cleveland if you can. Don't come back. It's a home of the foreclosure crisis. It's the epicenter. And there was just lots of lingering questions around what are we going to do in the face of foreclosures and abandonment, and what are cities like Cleveland, Detroit, Buffalo going to end up doing, right? And I think that in the early 2000s, early 2010s, there was a ton of momentum, I think, around the local food scene. I think that to put a little bit of a critical bend on it, it was a hot flash in the pan for maybe 5-10 years, and I think it sputtered out, right? And I think that the really encouraging thing is that over the past 5 years, I think that there's been the city philanthropy science has caught up to the wisdom that was already afoot years and years before there was a farm in Kinsman and urban agriculture was a thing. That is recognizing that we need to be investing in natural systems. We need to be investing in local food. We need to be investing in how to get our power from democratic and distributed systems. And I think that over the past 5 years, there's been this recognition that yes, the climate crisis is real, and we need to get really serious about it. There's capital moving towards it, both in public and private markets. Philanthropy's very slowly but surely getting their act together too, and starting to fund some of this work. And I think that it's just undeniable that stuff is happening, right? When we have air quality advisories on a weekly basis because of Canadian wildfires, even here in Cleveland, we are not immune to the impacts of the climate crisis. And so I think that what's missing from all of this, though, is an organizing consortium, right? I think that the Office of Sustainability is doing great work to galvanize and organize people, but there's limitations to what the city can do. We have some of the most well-endowed community foundations in the nation right here, and yet they're giving roughly 1 to 2% of their annual giving towards environmental action, right? So we need to ask more of them. We need to ask more of our corporate leaders to step up to begin funding the activities and the infrastructure that we need to take place, because the kind of work that we're all talking about is infrastructural in nature, right? We're talking about the scale of utility power grids, the scale of wastewater treatment facilities and landfilling, right? These are all of the systems that both need to be decarbonized and simultaneously carbon negative, right? And so the amount of capital that needs to be flowing into organizations like ours, candidly, and that need to be incubated to start new businesses that put our feet under the fire to do bigger, bolder, more exciting things is absolutely necessary. And I think that there's tons of momentum around the Inflation Reduction Act, around the CHIPS Act, that like is having money flow in, but if we don't have like conduits for businesses like ours and municipalities around the region to like really leverage these dollars, we're going to be in the exact same position we were early 2000s, right? Where we're looking around wondering like what happened, did the bottom fall out again? And I think that this is a really unique opportunity to like really play like a catalyzing leading role in momentum building that like can't be lost. And I think that like a lot of the organizations that need to be vaulted into leadership roles have been like fortified over these past decade or two to really like stand up and demonstrate to people all over the city that like we know what we're doing, we need the resources, we need land, we need introductions, we need contracts, and I think that we're all really, really well positioned to do that.
Thank you.
I agree 100%. I think the challenge for us is not to continue to push the ball down the field and say it's for the next generation to do. Most of our, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, we did some major damage to the environment. And there's no way around admitting that. It's just how do we take the personal responsibility to talk about fixing it, because it's not as much for our generation. I'm 58 years old, thank you for not recognizing, but I'm 58 years old and, nowhere near the prime of my life, but I think about my children and my children's children, and will there be anything left for them to survive on? We played outside, we did all the kind of things that a child could ever want to do growing up, and I don't know if we'll have that future for our children if we don't make some serious changes. And really acknowledge that there is a problem and not necessarily get involved as much on the politics side of it, because that goes back and forth. Whoever's in office makes decisions based on policy of environment. But ours is like to roll our sleeves up and just do the work. We operate the Ridolph farm. We work 24/7. Somebody has to be at our farm every day, 365 days a year to keep that operation going. And it's a commitment to the community first, to ourselves and to the community, to say that we're not going to give up on you, because the reality that we face in urban America is that the choices people have to make in terms of their food choices is the gas station. So the same place that an individual in the community would go and buy their gas from, they buy their beer, their lottery tickets, and their groceries. And that's a new thing in society. It was never like that in the past. There was some clear distinction. It was a grocery store. It was this kind, it was some clear distinctions, and it's not as much so. And the quality of food that exists in those type of places are so poor, it would break your heart. It would break your heart. So I think that's the part that needs to be fixed is access, and then more of the big box grocery stores are leaving those communities because they just don't represent the revenue generation, that a suburban Whole Foods or store of that type would. So we got a little work to do, but we're growing good food. We operate a farmer indoor produce market in Maple Heights called Farmer Jones Market. This is a shameless plug, but we do operate an indoor produce market. And just a tidbit, we have outsold Giant Eagle and Heinen's and seeded watermelons this year. Yes, it's a true story. We've outsold them in seeded watermelons because the trend was moving towards seedless. And not to get off track, but just a sidebar. And now folk don't want seedless anymore. They want seeded because everything in nature produces a seed. So in some ways, people are going back to, some basic food knowledge. And what we've learned is that in society today, we have the most educated consumer than any other time in history. You see people in store reading labels. They're looking for gluten-free. They're looking for this. They're looking for that, for keto, pito, wheato. They are really educated shoppers now. And they want the best for themselves, and they want the best for their families. And if we could find a way to provide that, and then once that product is consumed, taking that byproduct and turning it back into a food substance is again, that circular economy. So I would just add that for comment.
So I think we need to bring back like the watermelon seed spitting contest, right? I mean, it's been like decades, we haven't been able to do it. Now we can like do it again, thanks to you. So kudos. So the question again was what's working and what's not working, or where we've seen it. Okay, good. All right. So from a very specific standpoint, the city of Cleveland for many years has had tax abatement for redevelopment or development of residential projects. That has worked to help move us along the line, certainly from the mitigation standpoint, because every single one of those buildings that achieves the tax abatement has had to demonstrate a significant amount of energy savings over what a regular code related building would be, and or brought the historic older building up to code and be better for extra points. So I think that's been a really great step. From the deeper part of resiliency, that legislation which has enabled more development, and you see it in some of the neighborhoods, it hasn't spread out, which would be a not working piece. But you also see, because they all have to demonstrate compliance or achieve a certification with one of the prominent green building rating systems, those rating systems involve recognition of the importance of landscape design and stormwater mitigation and connectivity to community, and in the case of Enterprise Green Communities, social services connection to and opportunities for the people that live in the buildings. So that I think is a major win, and I know there's some changes coming to it, but it's definitely helped to further the point. What has not worked is the lack of leadership and courage to force the commercial buildings into the same space. So tax abatement and other is given to commercial development, and they are not held to the same standard, and that should change. Most communities in the United States that have a program have it for both. So it's an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that, and that is like Laura said, our office and within the city, we are working on updating the residential green building standards and trying to make them so that they it's encouraging development where we want development to happen. And I know what we're definitely pushing for for doing the same thing on the commercial side. And this kind of, I think, gets to that point, and also back to Dan's kind of call for capital. But Laura, kind of specifically working in the built environment, and I know this is kind of from my perspective within the city, but I'm sure it's sort of not sector specific. We run into roadblocks because of initial upfront costs of energy efficiency measures, or when we talk about community renewable energy. It's those are all really great, but they come at a upfront cost. How can we kind of put ourselves in a better position to be able to, not make those decisions so difficult at the kind of front end of those projects?
Well, I think this might be a little Pollyannish for me to say, but to assume that it's going to cost more is a false assumption. And not just first cost of dollars, like is it $5 versus $10? Certainly that's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not, depending on what we're talking about, not necessarily that much more to get the low efficient faucet that's usually cost neutral, or the slightly more efficient furnace if a furnace needs replaced, or the slightly better windows. We are not talking about 50% more cost or 20% more cost. It's very incremental. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a lot of incentives and financing vehicles available to both people in their homes as well as the commercial. So it's a lot of education. So before projects start, people should really start asking the questions and seek out the right advice on how to finance a project or to offset costs with some of the opportunities. And like I said, it's both at the residential level and at the commercial level. And then the last thing is a key thing that it seems to be forgotten is that whoever gets hired to do the job will do what you tell them to do. So if you say, I want an efficient building, that's not specific. So to say, and sometimes it's hard because the person leading the project maybe doesn't have the knowledge to how to say the question more specifically, but use numbers. I want to be 50% better. I want to be better than the 2030 goal would say I need to be. Like asking the right questions and being more specific in what you want the outcome to be. I want 100% of my stormwater to be treated on site will change the way the house is designed from a gutter system, right? So it's just very simple. Being specific will help whoever's going to design the project or build the project or, inform you to meet you where you are and to give you what you want.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to come back to the West Side Market and want to talk. First, I want Dan to talk a little bit about some of the work that Rust Belt Riders is doing there through our Circular Cleveland initiative, and then again thinking about these solutions that we kind of pilot or do sort of as a one-off. How can we start to think about how we scale those so that grocery stores citywide or residents citywide can start to I think see some of those benefits and incorporate some of that work as well?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, and you'd be forgiven for not knowing, but Rust Belt Riders has been working with the West Side Market for the past 9-ish months. And part of our contract with the West Side Market, or with the City of Cleveland, has been to conduct a 6-month-long pilot program at the West Side Market. We began that in earnest the last week of January of this year, so we're about 6 months into the pilot. We are working, knock on wood, to extend that at least for another 6 months, which we're really excited to do. But in short, what we are trying to do is to use the West Side Market as an example of any municipal building, right? The work that we're doing at the West Side Market could be a stand-in for a school, for City Hall, for anywhere where people are eating or working, right? It just so happens that the West Side Market is the most iconic food establishment in all of Ohio. So that's cool. And so the fact that we get to work with the market, the fact that we get to work with the tenants, we work with Jess closely, we work with the City Office of Sustainability, we work with a number of different departments to make sure that everybody that needs to be involved in understanding what decisions we're making and why we're making them can sort of live on beyond the term of our engagement. But in short, our proposal looked to say, okay, here's the West Side Market. It has lots of food come in, just like any city has lots of food come in. But there's a big question mark as to how it leaves, right? And residents, some of us compost at home, some of us use a service, some of us send it to landfill. The city didn't really know what was the waste composition of the West Side Market. How much of the material is getting recycled? How much needs to be landfilled and what can be composted? So we began by doing a month-long waste audit process to really better understand the composition of the waste material or resource material at the West Side Market. From there, we began to insert interventions like we would at any of the other businesses that we work with to ensure the material that can be composted gets composted. And so pretty much any food that isn't fit for human consumption can and should be composted. But I think one of the unique spins that we put onto our engagement with the city and with the market was we brought in a partner of ours called the Hunger Network of Greater Cleveland. And so the Hunger Network does the work before composting. And so there's this very helpful chart called the food waste hierarchy, and it examines what should we do when we encounter food that is in surplus of what I might need, right? So at the very top, it's eat that food, right? If you can't eat that food, perhaps there's someone in your community who does not have access to a nutritional meal. In Northeast Ohio, it's about 1 in 5 children, so lots. If you can't get that food to them in a healthy or safe manner, you should feed it to your future food, which in many cases is pigs or chickens or fish. If you can't do that, then you compost it, and that's where we come in. So we work with the Hunger Network to do food rescue. So market vendors can opt in to donate their excess food that is still fit for human consumption to the Hunger Network of Greater Cleveland. Hunger Network then visits the market on an as-needed basis to rescue that material, and then they redistribute that to food pantries around the near west side and near east side. For material that is beyond what is fit for them, we capture that. And over the past 6 months, we've collected about 32,000 pounds of material. So our estimates are roughly that, like, over the course of a year, the market will need to compost around 65,000 pounds of material. And that's good, right? That's an important thing. It is far better sent to a compost facility than to a landfill by a nearly immeasurable amount. And so we're really honored to be entrusted with that material and with that resource, and to partner with Ridall to make sure that it gets properly composted. And so that's what we've been doing. And I think that part of what we're trying to do is to ensure and give a playbook to the cities so that other facilities can not need to start from square one when they're saying, hey, we're building a new police headquarters, right? Should we have a third bin at that police headquarters? And if so, how much is it going to cost? Well, guess what? You can plug in using a tool that we've developed to say X number of employees, Y number of meals. We're going to need composting services at this regularity, and it'll cost us this much. And so we think that every facility needs to be doing this in the same way that, like, we think about wastewater treatment or utilities like electric. We are making the argument that, like, given the science around the climate crisis and the relationship between food going to landfills and methane emissions, like, we need to immediately stop sending all food to landfills. Like, it cannot happen anymore if we are to avoid the very worst impacts of the climate crisis. And we need a corresponding, like, infrastructure investment to have that take place. And so maybe at a later point I'll talk about how it's challenging because for as much food waste as we pick up, and we're on pace to pick up about 7 million pounds of food scraps this year, we're running out of, like, food waste processing facilities. So even if you wanted to wave a magic wand and ban food from going to landfills here just in Cleveland or in Cuyahoga County, we need acres and acres and acres more processing facility to turn that into healthy soil that can then be redistributed. And so it is both a push and a pull. It's demand side and supply side. It's complex and it's challenging, and it's what keeps me up at night. So, yeah.
Thank you. So again, thinking about this replicability and how we're sort of using what we know to kind of expand those benefits citywide. Kima, I want to get your thoughts on, how we can continue to, I think, use what Ridall is teaching us to expand, community gardens and local agriculture, kind of citywide into kind of all of our vulnerable communities.
Sure. First, I would start by saying that first we should all realize that Cleveland is a national model. I mean, if you survey the cities, I think my panelists will agree, we may not be at the total tipping point of where we want to be, but when folks around the country talk about the efforts of Cleveland ranks at the top of the top 10 in terms of regenerative thinking, agriculture, compost, and urban ag, that whole slate. And I'll return to a point that Dan made earlier about the tipping point of urban ag. So in 2020, 2010, there was this huge upsurge of all these urban farms just took off. It was 50 urban farms in Cleveland, but after 2015, it started to tip off. And first what we realized is that most folks didn't realize it's a lot of work. That was really the first thing we realized. It's a lot of work, and it's almost like being married. It's a commitment. It's a relationship, and you have to give it something every day, and it gives you back something every day in order to really sustain it. So a lot of folks got hit with the learning curve because community garden is how well the community responds and helps. So you start with 20 people in the community, you end up with just you, right? And then you got all this acreage you need to take care of. So I think the take-home message is that what we found out about the Ridall model is that farming and growing produce is probably the least thing that we do, not least in terms of value, but least in terms of impact. And I say that because as I view Ridall over the last 13 years, I think the thing we've done more was create an environment. And what we've learned over these 13 years that if you can change an environment, there's a direct correlation between environment and behavior. So the folks that dwell in the area of our farm, which is in Garden Valley, it's a public housing area, Lower Kinsman. Some of these residents may never leave their neighborhood. They may never see a farm. They may never see a green space. And when we created this environment, it showed us that environment impacts behavior because you act differently in different environments. And I think the audience would agree with that. You may act differently around your friends than you would your parents, and it's just, we gave the community an opportunity to see what green space looks like and the effect that green space can have on you. Because studies have shown that when you put your hands in the soil, there is a chemical effect that takes place between the soil and the brain that releases a feel-good hormone, right? That's why when you garden, you feel good because there's something biological taking place there. So we put value on those type of things to say that there's something working here that's beyond just us planting vegetables and growing, and composting and doing those things. There's some intrinsic value that happens when you come to the Riddall farm. And so we've tried to make that a greater thing so that we can attract more people. Just last Monday, we had a group from Parker Hannafin come down. We had 100 volunteers, and they all just left saying thank you. They felt like their life had been changed. They had saw the stars in the sky. They had saw an epiphany, but it's about the environment. And not to sound cliche, but the old movie Field of Dreams, they said if you build it, they will come. And it's so true with what we do at Riddall because we use farming as just a tool to reach people, but our primary goal is to transform communities. And if we could we always say, if we could take an old banana and turn it into compost that we could sell for $35, $40 a yard, what more could we do with a human being that's willing to change and willing to make a difference in their life? So we kind of hang our motto around that, and I think that's what's been most successful for us. That type of approach, and going back to the circular economy deal, it just means so much when all of the points connect. And we were very intentional about naming it the Riddall Green Partnership because we knew it would take community members to be a part of this effort, that we couldn't do it by ourselves. There's no way we could do it by ourselves. And so Dan and them came along, and other organizations in the city came along, and even folks from out of town came along to say, hey, this is a model worth investigating. And we put our heart, our blood, sweat, and tears into that farm every day. And I think that we get the results because it is a part of it where you almost lose yourself because we've had instances in our career where we've had people in the city, people in different CDCs that maybe agreed or disagreed with us. And 6 months later, they had moved on to another job. And we realized that Riddall is not a job for us. It's our lifestyle. It's our life. I can't never quit Riddall, because that's my life. I don't have nothing else outside of that. I just retired 2 years ago as an engineer for 20 years in avionics. And to come and work with Riddall, and just last year, my wife was able to retire as a registered nurse from Cleveland Clinic. To come on board on Riddall to manage this organization that started out with 1 or 2 people, and now we hired 16, 18 people on payroll. I mean, it's grown quite a bit, but it's only grown because we have a committed staff. We have folks that care about the community, that care about the work that we do, and we just believe that if you create the right environment, you can create the right opportunity for change. So I hope that answered your question in a roundabout way.
Yeah. We'll switch to audience questions if anybody has a question. We're switching to audience questions if anybody has a question.
Thank you for taking the time to come and be with us tonight. So we live in in a blue bubble in a red state. And somebody mentioned that somehow capitalizing, bringing capital to this might appeal to folks in the farm community and the rest of the state. You're talking about how you need so much more space to put, the composting methodology to work. Have you guys thought about how to introduce this? It's going to have to be political. I'm sorry, but you just got to go political a little bit. Thank you.
Oh, I think about this a lot. Yeah, I mean, I think that like what I call nature-based solutions is keeping small family farms from becoming developments. It's zoning law that ensures sprawl stops. It's ensuring that your rural way of life not get impeded by the sprawls of suburbia, right? I think that so for a year I worked in Ashtabula County. I was the local foods coordinator out in Ashtabula County, and trust me, those small farmers love cities, because guess what's in cities? Bougie diners that love to know where their chicken came from. And so, truly, there needs to be a greater intentionality of this urban prairie connection and vice versa, right? The amount of food that is brought into urban centers like Cleveland, we are a net importer of food, which is nitrogen. That nitrogen needs to be mixed with carbon, which will then create a ton of compost. We can't even consume all of that compost locally, right? That's one of the big challenges that we have as a maker of compost, as I'm sure Riddall does as well, is you need to be selling compost at scale for broad agricultural usage. And so this symbiotic relationship between the excesses of urban living being an input to sustaining rural life and and environments, I think is actually a really, really cool one. And I think that in addition to that, because of our proximity to fresh water, we have the urgency and oddly enough in Ohio, the beginnings of the formation of some policies that actually begin to make sense around how we begin to value fresh water, right? I mean, we saw the algal blooms that took Toledo's water facilities totally offline, right? Why did that happen? Because you need to topically apply phosphorus to farmlands out west. Why do you need to do that? Because there isn't enough organic matter. I have a solution for you. It's called compost. And so the solutions are really actually quite simple, but the moment you say the scary words climate change, you're going to ostracize people. And I think that what you need to do is reframe it in ways and in language that are resonant to them, and independence and autonomy. I'm happy to use whatever language makes people feel comfortable, as long as it gets us towards the end that makes the most sense.
Only thing I would add is that we spent millions of dollars disrupting the environment. At least we could do is spend at least that much repairing it. So I would throw that in for context.
Anyone else have a question they want to ask?
We have a lot more time on the agenda, so I figured I'd give one a shot. So, Laura, you mentioned something about some of the larger corporations maybe not being held to the same standards, or commercial same standards. And I think Dan, you mentioned something about having some well-endowed foundations that might not be chipping in, or at least maybe reading into what you said, as much as they can. And they're all kind of in the same bed to some extent. What can the average person do, and what ways can we move the needle? We're not all millionaires. We're not running big corporations or foundations, but we can do something. So get creative. What can any of us do to move that needle and get them more engaged and involved to get you guys what you need?
So in the context of helping to drive change, it's putting your money where your mouth is. And so it's shopping at the companies that do believe and have a commitment to climate resiliency, either through the work that they do or the way they run their company and the products they sell. There's something called 1% for the planet. So there are some corporations that give 1% of their revenue, not their profit, because that would be, funny money, but 1% of their revenue to organizations that support climate change, or it's, making sure that if you're going to move into an apartment or have office space, that you're being selective of where you put your space, and that it's in a building that's making those kind of changes, and of course buying the products and services. I would just footnote on this whole conversation that as much as local is super important in the context of climate resiliency, because our climate, we do live in a global economy and world, and of course we know Canada's wildfires get here, so other people's money gets here and goes out. And it doesn't matter, in my opinion, I run around to say this to anybody who'll listen, it doesn't matter if it's blue or red at the State House or the City Hall or the White House, because Europe cares and other parts of this world care. And this is a global economy, and many of our major corporations operate in that global economy, and some of them have woken up, not all of them, but many of them have woken up and started to make the change. And you can see it trickle down in the way they treat their employees better, the way they treat their communities better. And so just more encouragement and recognition. We have to do our work. We have to be informed, do our work.
And I think, thinking about that, on the local level, I think in Cleveland, we're lucky that we have, we have a responsive city council who is very much hears and communicates the needs of their constituents onto the administration. And so I think, when we're talking about okay, we need policy changes in the city, if there is pressure coming at the administration, and this is like me as an employee of the city, if that's coming from council because they're hearing it from their residents, that's going to escalate that work. So I do think that I think it sounds like maybe a little cliche where it's write to your representatives. But I think on the local level, especially, that definitely has weight. And we hear, I was talking with some council members today about EV charging stations, and they're relaying what they're hearing from their residents and that impacts the projects that the city is doing, definitely.
I have 3 concrete things that I would ask you to do. The first, do I have 3? Yeah. The first is, so you might have a retirement account if you're fortunate enough. That is money that is being invested on your behalf into something. So wherever you work, if you're self-employed, even better, because you probably have more autonomy to do it, but if you don't, look into this organization called Carbon Collective. It is a totally decarbonized retirement investment account that will not only divest from fossil fuel intensive companies, but invest in companies that are blazing the trails for a carbon negative future. That's thing 1. Thing 2 is get involved in the people's budget. This was just a piece of legislation that got or petitions that got collected that will go to the ballot in November. You want to talk about how you as a resident can impact the direct flowing of citywide budget. That's an initiative that is going to seek to direct 1% or 2%. Either 1 or 2% of the city's budget towards initiatives that matter to you. If you're like me, initiative that matters to me is that we decarbonize a bunch of stuff. And then third, what was the third one? To just know that and this is weird coming from a guy that offers services to individuals, but we need to ask more of the businesses and elected officials that we have, and I think that's why the people's budget is important. But it's kind of a myth, and this is going to sound weird in this context. It's a total myth that individual choices are going to change the fate of the planet, and that isn't to sound despondent or a bummer, but if Cleveland Water springs a leak, they're going to waste a lot more water than you if you took a 15-minute shower. And so I think that we need to just demand more of the systems that we have in place, and also recognize that the outcomes to those improvements could be better. I actually thought of the third one. That wasn't it. Go to Rewiring America. This is a website that has what's called an IRA calculator. In there, you can enter your annual household income and your zip code and see what tax incentives you qualify for to electrify your house. The average Clevelander is around $35,000.
And just a few small changes, composting at home. I mean, that seems like so simple, but small steps mean a lot. When you get, you know, 1 million people doing one thing, it adds up quite a bit. And so that's always something that's in our power to do is, you know, what we do at home, you know, recycle the plastic, get that out of there, keep the if you can create a compost bin at home, real simple. It's not very difficult. You won't have a flood of rodents in your house or nothing like that, or in your garage or backyard. It's just really easy. Actually, we have training classes that show you how to do that. But some just simple stuff you could do beyond the high level stuff is just, you know, be more conscious about how we manage our waste stream and where it goes, and just think about those kind of things, so that could help as well.
I know Libby has one last question before we get to her last question and close out. I just want to thank Elena from Home Pantry, who did all our catering. All of our food came from Westside Market. And say, yeah, thank you to Elena. And then once we finish up here, feel free to grab, you know, the bar will still be open, grab more food, grab a drink, mingle. But thank you all for being here. And Libby, I'll let you ask your last question.
Yeah, thanks. So, you know, when we were preparing for this meeting, we were talking about defining climate resiliency, and that we have to adapt to this world that's going to look scarier and, you know, be rainier and hotter and harder for different populations. Jessica made the comment of like, this is really scary stuff, and it can be. And so my question back to the panelists is sort of knowing this and the things that are at risk. What are the ways that you kind of stay hopeful and kind of keep plugging away day after day, sort of knowing that, you know, we can make this difference?
I'll jump in. I should give a disclaimer first that I am a glass half full person. So I'm like the extreme serial optimist, and I think the world is always going to get better every day, and I see it through that lens. You know, sometimes I watch the news, not as much, but I believe that more people make it home safe every day than run into harm's way. You know, I believe that we have a shared vision about what we want for our lives. We want to eat healthy. We want to be around good people. You know, we want family. We always say that the longest relationship you'll have in your life is with food, right? So you may, you know, get mad at your sibling or get a divorce or, you know, curse out your brother or whatever the case may be, but this food relationship is one that you're going to have to maintain your entire life. And we just believe that you should make it the best relationship that you possibly can. It means everything. You know, some of our best memories are over the dinner table. We believe that if we could sit down and have a meal together, we could probably solve the majority of the world's problems. If we could just break bread together and see where we can meet, because I don't see the world in black and white. I see the world as green. You know, and if we could stay in that space, I think we're in a ripe opportunity for change, because as I search through, you know, my journey, you know, it's always darkest before the dawn. It's always the worst before it gets better. And that's just, it runs through history. You can go through from country to power structures to you name it. It's always darkest before the dawn. And I think we're at that tipping point right now, we have a real unique opportunity to make something very impactful happen that may not come around again for another 15, 20 years. And so I'm really excited about what the future holds. I'm very optimistic about it. I look at the work that's being done in Cleveland. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I see it as a national model that folks are saying Cleveland is if you're talking green, Cleveland is a place to be. And because of the work that all of the panelists are doing and all of you do in your own personal lives, it means a lot. You know, folks ask all the time, is there any competition in urban ag? No, we need 1,000 urban farms, right? We need 1,000 because the need is so great. We don't just need one Ritol, we need 100 Ritol, we need 100 Rust Belt Wire, we need 100 of what you do because the need is so great. And I'm really excited to see the energy that the city is putting behind it. I'm really excited to see that, you know, the mayor's on board. We've begun recently working with military veterans, and we have a dedicated space for them at our farm to come and heal and be whole. So it's more than just the food, it's the social aspect of this whole thing about community healing and community health, not just around food, because we all know that even now this new mental health thing is becoming a big thing. But a lot of that's diet related as well. So I would just close by saying that I'm just really encouraged by what I see. Really encouraged for the work that the city is doing, and it just means everything, because when you do have that support behind you, you can do a lot. And you can do a lot, and the funding is very important, like Dan mentioned, because you can't do but so much with so much, and we need that. And but regardless, we'll still do the work. We'll still do the work regardless of whatever the city does. If it's blue, if it's red, if it's yellow, if it's orange, we're gonna still do the work, because it's in our DNA now. It's in our spirit to do. And so I would close by saying that and say thank you for inviting me on this panel tonight.
I'll go. So I think we are lucky to be where we are on the planet, next to a source of fresh water with a variable climate as it is, so that we're not already in a extreme area that is going to suffer the most from some of the things that are going to happen. So that in and of itself, it's like lucky stars, right? Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're here, and so what can we do to protect? I think the thing that gives me hope and is that there are so many people and so many organizations doing great work. It's not always evident, but it is there. And like I was saying, with all of the residential development that's gone on and benefited because of that tax abatement, the housing stock is top notch of what's available on some of these new units that have come out in the last however many years. Has it been 10 maybe since that's there? And that's a boon for us. It's great. And so just there's a lot happening. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of momentum, and it will continue to grow. One of the things people ask me all the time is, well, how do you make the business case to your clients, and how do you convince them? I don't. You're not a believer, move along, because there's someone who is and who's ready to roll up their sleeves and make the investment and do the work. And so as they say, you are defined by the community that you keep. And one of the things that I think is really important for all of us who understand and believe is to just stay focused and stay connected, because small armies can make big change. Thank you.
I think about this a lot, and I really don't like the language of hope. I think, hope seems like passive. It's like, Jesus, take the wheel. And I want to grip the wheel. I want to grip the wheel with like a bunch of other people who are like in this room and steer this in the direction that it must go. And so like hope to me is really passive, and I think what we need is like big, bold, brave action that is inspiring, and not like I can do without this. It's like, no, like heat pumps are cool. They heat and cool your house and use 50% less energy. Like that rules. I think that like we need to like begin telling better, more inspiring stories to one another about like the amazing future that we can have if we get our act together. Like hope is fickle, and I think that like what we need is bravery. So go be brave.
Thank you, everyone.